My name is Sophie, and for exactly 1,825 days, I was the sole reason Congressman Grayson Hemlock sounded brilliant. That's 5 years. 5 years of turning his garbled, half-formed notions into soaring rhetoric that made hardened journalists weep. 5 years of crafting every speech that landed him on the evening news, every sharp-witted op-ed that went viral, every single clever tweet that made him seem relatable and intellectually formidable. I was the architect of his public persona, the ghost in his political machine, and for 5 years he called me kid. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday, under the sickly fluorescent lights of his Capitol Hill office. The air was thick with the smell of ambition and stale coffee, a scent I had come to associate with my own slow erasure. He'd called me in for what he'd billed as a major strategy session. I walked in, expecting to finally get the reins of the Senate campaign, the one we'd been planning in hushed, excited tones for more than a year, the one I had already built the entire messaging framework for. He was standing by the window, looking out at the Capitol dome, a posture he always struck when he was about to perform. He turned, a smile plastered on his face, the kind that never reached his eyes. It was his deal-closing smile, the one I had written for him. He said, "Sophie, great news." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach, a cold counterpoint to the forced warmth in his voice. I knew that tone. It was the tone he used right before he took credit for one of my ideas in a committee hearing. "We're officially launching the Senate Exploratory Committee next month," he said, his hands clasped behind his back. "The funding is there, the polling is phenomenal. This is it, the big leagues." I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. "That's incredible news, Grayson. I have the announcement drafts ready." He waved a dismissive hand, the smile faltering for just a second. Right, about that." He walked over to his grand mahogany desk, a piece of furniture that cost more than my first car, and leaned against it. He looked at me, his head tilted. "Kid, you've been incredible, a real diamond in the rough. Seriously, I don't know what I would have done without you these past 5 years. Here it comes, the but, the word that hangs in the air like an executioner's axe. But," he continued, "the Senate is a different animal. This isn't a cozy little district race anymore. We need a heavier weight class. We need someone with a national profile, someone seasoned." The word seasoned was delivered with a kind of reverence, as if it were a quality I at 32 could never possibly possess, despite having single-handedly crafted the political identity of the man standing in front of me. He didn't wait for me to respond. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. A man I hadn't even noticed rose from it. He was probably in his late 50s, with silvered hair that was just a little too perfect, a suit that was aggressively tailored, and the predatory, empty smile of a lobbyist who smells a commission. "Sophie, I'd like you to meet Sterling Vance," he said. Sterling is one of the top political strategists in the country. He ran the president's last campaign in the Midwest. He's going to be taking over as campaign director and chief strategist. Sterling glided forward and took my hand in a grip that was both too firm and vaguely moist. His cologne was overpowering, a pleasure, he oozed, his eyes scanning me with a brief, dismissive flicker. "I've heard good things." It was the way he said good things that did it. The condescending patronage, the immediate sizing up and writing off. In his eyes, I wasn't the architect. I was the hired help, part of the furniture that came with the office. Grayson, ever the performer, clapped his hands together. "Now, the best part. I've carved out a special role just for you, Sophie. You'll be Deputy Communications Assistant, working right under Sterling. You can help him get up to speed on my voice." Deputy Communications Assistant. It wasn't a role, it was a cage, an insult wrapped in the cheap paper of a job title. To go from being the voice to being the person who helps the new guy learn the voice. It was a public execution, and I was the only one in the room who understood the mortal wound being delivered. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a chilling quiet in the center of a raging inferno. I pulled my hand back from Sterling's. I looked past the smarmy strategist, past the condescending politician, and met Grayson's eyes. I held his gaze until he was the one to look away. "Thank you for the offer, Congressman," I said, my voice even, betraying none of the seismic activity happening inside me. "I'll need some time to consider it." Grayson's relief was palpable. Of course, take the rest of the day. We're all a team here." We're going to make history. I turned and walked out of the office, my back straight, my steps measured. I didn't look back. The sound of their self-congratulatory laughter followed me down the hall, each chuckle a shovel of dirt on the grave they had just dug for me. But as the heavy office door clicked shut behind me, a different thought, cold and clear, began to form. They thought they were burying me. They didn't realize they were planting a seed. The drive back to my sterile beige-walled apartment in Arlington was a blur. I remember the brake lights of the car in front of me, little red suns bleeding into the gray afternoon. I remember the monotone voice of the GPS telling me to turn, a stark contrast to the screaming chaos inside my own head. I parked the car in my designated spot, turned off the engine, and just sat there in the sudden deafening silence. The weight of the last 5 years, of all the sacrificed weekends, the missed birthdays, the 2 a.m. rewrites, came crashing down on me. It wasn't a gentle wave of sadness, it was a tsunami of humiliation. I had given that man my mind. I had poured my intellect, my passion, my very words into the empty vessel of his ambition. And he had thanked me by calling me kid, and then handing my life's work to a Gucci-clad parasite named Sterling. In the confines of my Honda, with no one to perform for, the professional composure finally shattered. The breakdown wasn't loud, it was a quiet, gut-wrenching implosion. Tears I hadn't even realized were welling up, began to trace hot paths down my cheeks. I wasn't just fired, or demoted, I was erased, I was invalidated, and the worst part, the part that twisted the knife, was that for 5 years, I had let it happen. I had been complicit in my own diminishment. My apartment felt alien, a place where a stranger lived. I walked through the small living room, my professional bag dropping to the floor with a thud. I sank onto the sofa, the silence of the room amplifying the frantic monologue in my mind. Why had I stayed? Why had I put up with it for so long? The questions circled like vultures, and the answers, when they came, were not flattering. I remembered my first day, walking into his cramped, chaotic campaign office for the district race. I was 27, fresh off a master's program in public policy, filled with a desperate, earnest desire to do some good in the world. Grayson Hemlock wasn't a polished political figure then. He was a local councilman with a lot of energy and a set of ideals that at the time seemed to perfectly mirror my own. He spoke of revitalizing our district, of fighting for the little guy, of bringing integrity back to public service. I drank it all in. I believed him. My first big task was a speech for the local Chamber of Commerce. He gave me a page of incoherent bullet points, a word salad of buzzwords. I stayed up for 2 nights, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning need to prove myself. I wove his jumbled thoughts into a narrative, a story about our town's history and its future. I gave it a soul. When he delivered it, he got a standing ovation. He came back to the office, beaming, and slapped me on the back. Great job, kid. We really knocked it out of the park. In the beginning, it was always we. A few months later, there was an op-ed in the state paper, a vicious attack on his economic platform. He was panicking. I locked myself in my cubicle for 10 hours, and wrote a rebuttal so sharp, so well-reasoned, and so elegantly cutting, that the paper published it in its entirety. It defined his first term. It became the cornerstone of his reputation as a thoughtful, pragmatic leader. When a national political blog picked it up, Grayson was interviewed. The reporter asked him, "Congressman, the prose in your rebuttal was remarkably powerful. Did you have help writing it?" I remember watching the interview on my laptop, my heart pounding. I saw him smile, that same smile from this afternoon. He said, "I just felt so passionately about the issue. The words just poured out of me. It came from the heart, my words." His credit, the we had become I told myself it didn't matter. It wasn't about the credit. It was about the work. It was about the good we were doing. That became my mantra, the lie I told myself every time he presented one of my policy briefs as his own spontaneous brilliance. I endured the constant, casual condescension. The way he'd introduce me in high-level meetings as my wunderkind Sophie, she makes the words pretty. The way he'd dismiss my strategic concerns with a pat on the head and a "don't you worry your pretty little head about the big picture, kid." It was a slow, steady erosion of my professional identity. I was becoming a function, not a person, an app on his phone that generated eloquence on demand. This is the part that's hard to admit, the part that viewers might debate. Why stay? It was a cocktail of misplaced loyalty, and if I'm being brutally honest, a kind of fear. I had hitched my wagon to his star. My entire professional world was contained within his orbit. Leaving felt like stepping off a cliff into nothingness. I told myself I was being pragmatic. I was building a resume, making connections. But the truth is, I was just too afraid to start over. And then there was the other reason. The real foundation of his success, the so-called Hemlock economic miracle that had made him a rising star in the party. It was a detailed revolutionary plan for hyper-local economic development. It was complex, nuanced, and utterly brilliant. It was also the one thing I hadn't written. He had come to me with it fully formed, a dense 200-page document he claimed he'd been working on for years. It was the bedrock of his political identity, and I, like everyone else, believed he was its author. It was the one piece of him I thought was genuinely his own genius. That belief allowed me to rationalize all the other thefts. I could stomach him stealing my words, if the underlying ideas, the core mission, were his own noble creation. My mind drifted further back, past the 5 years of disillusionment, to a time of genuine intellectual excitement, to my final year of grad school, and to him, Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch was a legend in the economics department, a true genius who existed in a permanent state of rumpled tweed and frantic intellectual energy. He was brilliant, but cripplingly shy. He hated public speaking. His lectures were delivered in a low, rapid-fire mumble, directed more at the whiteboard than at the students. Most of my classmates were intimidated by him, but I was fascinated. I saw the pure, unadulterated passion he had for his subject. I enrolled in every class he taught. I went to his office hours, and slowly, painstakingly, I earned his trust. He saw something in me. He said I had a structural mind, the ability to see the architecture of an idea, not just the decorations. He became my mentor. He'd let me read his draft papers, and we'd have long, rambling conversations over lukewarm tea in his cluttered office, surrounded by teetering stacks of books. It was in that office that he first told me about his magnum opus. He didn't have a grand name for it then. He just called it his symbiotic model. It was a radical rethinking of local economics, moving away from attracting massive corporations and focusing on cultivating an interconnected web of small local businesses. It was about creating a self-sustaining economic ecosystem. It was beautiful, it was elegant, and it was his entire life. I remember the last time I saw him. It was a week before my graduation. He was almost vibrating with a nervous energy I'd never seen before. He had been invited to present his model at the prestigious Aspen Economic Policy Conference. It was his big break, his chance to finally share his work with the world. He showed me the manuscript, bound in a simple black folder, 200 pages of dense, brilliant, world-changing ideas. He was terrified, but also hopeful. This was it. This was everything. Then, silence. A few weeks later, I heard through the academic grapevine that his presentation had been canceled at the last minute. A family emergency, the official story went. Dr. Finch disappeared. He resigned his tenure at the end of the semester, citing health reasons. He fell off the academic map completely. No more papers, no more conference appearances. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered about in the department lounge. The brilliant mind who just vanished. I tried to reach out once, via his old university email, but it bounced back. The trail went cold. I had always wondered what happened, what could have so profoundly broken such a brilliant man. Back in my apartment, the present crashed back in. I had to get my things from the office, my personal files, my books, the few small plants on my windowsill. I knew if I waited until morning, my access card would be deactivated. I couldn't face Grayson or Sterling, so I decided to go late, after everyone had left. Around 11 p.m., I let myself into the darkened office. It was eerie and silent, a tomb of my own making. My little cubicle, once my entire world, now just looked pathetic. I packed my belongings into a single cardboard box. As I was unplugging my personal hard drive, my backup research drive, a thought struck me. It was a petty thought, born of pure spite. I wanted proof of my work. I wanted to have a portfolio of every major speech, every op-ed. I plugged the drive into my laptop. I started digging through old folders, files dating back 5 years, and that's when I saw it, a folder I didn't recognize creating. It was from my first month on the job. The folder was labeled thesemlock_econ_platform_drafts. My breath caught. This was it. The origin story, the one piece of Grayson's genius. I clicked it open, my curiosity overriding my despair. Inside were a few files: early_notes.docs, outline_v1, txt, and one other folder, curiously labeled source_material_EEPC_2018, EEPC. The Aspen Economic Policy Conference. A cold dread, colder than anything I had felt that afternoon, washed over me. My hands were shaking as I double-clicked the folder. Inside were two files. One was a PDF titled symbiotic_localism_final_draft.pdf. The other was a small file, an email archive. I opened the PDF first. The screen lit up with a familiar font, a familiar Weiss. Page after page of dense, brilliant, world-changing ideas. It wasn't Grayson's work, it was Dr. Alistair Finch's unpublished manuscript, the one he had shown me in his office, all those years ago. The Hemlock economic miracle was a lie. It was a theft. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I closed the PDF, my mind reeling. Then, with a sense of sickening inevitability, I opened the email archive. There it was, an email chain from 2018, the sender, Grayson Hemlock, from a private email address, the recipient, Dr. Alistair Finch. The first email was from Grayson, a week before the conference. He was effusive, laying the charm on thick. Professor Finch, I was given your name by a colleague. I'm a local councilman deeply interested in innovative economic policy. I heard you're presenting a fascinating new model at Aspen. I'd be honored if you'd allow me to review the manuscript beforehand, to prepare some informed questions for your panel. The second email was from Alistair. He was cautious, but flattered. Mr. Hemlock, thank you for your interest. The work is still in a preliminary stage, but I would be happy to share the draft. I trust you will keep it in the strictest confidence until after the presentation. Attached to that email was the PDF file, symbiotic_localism_final_draft.pdf. The final email was from Grayson, sent just minutes after he received the file, a single curt sentence. Thanks, got it, that was it. That was the entire exchange, the polite request, the trusting handover, the abrupt dismissive confirmation, and then silence. Grayson had never gone to that panel. Dr. Finch's presentation had been cancelled, and a few months later, Councilman Grayson Hemlock had burst onto the political scene with a revolutionary economic platform that he claimed was his own. He hadn't just stolen the ideas, he had stolen the man's entire life's work. He had stolen his voice, his future, and driven him into a self-imposed exile. The tears of humiliation from that afternoon were gone. They had been burned away by a white-hot, righteous fury. This was so much bigger than my job. It was bigger than my wounded pride. This was about a profound, career-ending, life-destroying act of intellectual piracy. I looked at the files on my screen, the manuscript, the emails, the proof, the raw, undeniable truth. The vague, formless anger I felt had now cooled, hardened, and sharpened into a weapon. It had a purpose. It had a target. The rage settled into a profound, crystalline calm. My mind, the same mind that had built Grayson Hemlock's career, was now focused on a new project. A project of deconstruction. I saved the files. I ejected the drive, and as I stood there in the silent, empty office, I made a promise. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about restoring a truth that had been buried for 5 long years, and I was the only one on Earth who held the shovel. The plan didn't form in a flash of cinematic inspiration. It coalesced slowly, meticulously, in the quiet of my apartment over the next 48 hours. It was a work of architecture, just like the speeches I used to write. I was building a case, a fortress, and a guillotine, all at the same time. The first rule of this new project was silence. Grayson and Sterling expected a disgruntled employee to lash out. They expected angry emails, bitter social media posts, maybe a leak to a second-rate political blogger. Noise. I would give them nothing but absolute, unnerving silence. My resignation was a 2-sentence email sent from my personal account at 7 a.m. the next morning. Mr. Hemlock, thank you for the opportunities you have provided. I am resigning my position, effective immediately. No explanation, no emotion, just a cold, clean break. My first priority was securing the evidence. A single copy on a personal drive was a vulnerability. It could be lost, corrupted, or stolen. I spent 3 hours creating a web of redundancy that would be almost impossible to dismantle. I bought a new, encrypted external solid-state drive. I copied the folder containing the manuscript and the email archive onto it. Then I created a password-protected zip file of the folder. The password was a string of 24 random characters, mixed with a line from a poem Dr. Finch once quoted to me. I uploaded this encrypted file to 3 separate, secure cloud storage services, each registered with a different anonymous email address. I wrote down the login details and the master password on a small piece of paper, sealed it in an envelope, and put it inside another, larger envelope which I sent via registered mail to my parents' house in Ohio with the instruction only to be opened upon my direct verbal request. Finally, I took the new encrypted hard drive, wrapped it in bubble wrap, placed it in a small box, and paid for a year-long contract on a small safe deposit box at a bank branch 3 towns over. The original drive I had taken from the office. I took a hammer to it in my kitchen sink, shattering the plastic casing and the delicate platters within, then disposed of the pieces in 3 separate public trash cans. The evidence was now everywhere and nowhere. It was a ghost, just like I had been. With the leverage secured, I turned to my next asset, human intelligence. I needed eyes and ears inside the campaign. Grayson thought my only loyalty was to him, a fatal miscalculation. Over 5 years, I had mentored several junior staffers, the ones who did the real work while the political appointees took the credit. The most promising among them was a young woman named Maya. She was a junior press aide, sharp, observant, and deeply disillusioned with the empty political posturing that permeated the office. She respected my work, not my title. She was my perfect insider. I texted her, "Coffee, my treat. Have some news." We met at a small, noisy cafe far from Capitol Hill. She looked worried. She'd heard the rumors about Sterling Vance. I didn't lay out the entire scheme. That would be reckless. Instead, I played the part of the honorably discharged soldier. I told her I was leaving, that Grayson wanted to go in a different direction. I framed it as my choice to seek new challenges rather than accept a diminished role. Her face fell. She said, "Sophie, you can't. You're the only one here who actually cares about the policy. Sterling Vance is a hack. He just spent an hour giving a presentation on synergizing our brand optics. I think he used the word leverage 17 times. I smiled, a genuine one this time. That's why I need you to be my ears, Maya. I didn't say more. I didn't have to. She understood immediately. She was a kindred spirit, another undervalued architect in a world of loud, empty suits. She saw the injustice. Her loyalty wasn't to the congressman, it was to the work I had represented. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're already in chaos. Sterling wants to scrap the entire economic message. He says it's too academic and lacks populist punch. He wants to replace it with a focus group-tested slogan about unleashing freedom. Grayson is letting him do it. Perfect." They were dismantling their own greatest asset without me having to lift a finger. I told Maya to just observe, to take notes. Send me a summary at the end of each day from a private email account. Nothing sensitive, just the general mood and direction. She agreed without hesitation. My quiet intelligence network was now active. The next phase was the most difficult, the most delicate, and the most important. It was the heart of the entire operation. I had to find Dr. Alistair Finch. This couldn't just be my story, it had to be his. His validation was the moral and legal core of my entire plan. Without him, I was just a disgruntled employee with a stolen file. With him, I was an agent of justice. My search began online. I scoured university databases, academic publication sites, social media, nothing. It was as if he had been digitally scrubbed from existence after 2018. His university profile was gone. His personal blog was defunct. It was a digital dead end. I felt a pang of despair. What if he was gone for good? What if the damage Grayson had done was truly absolute? Then I remembered a small, offhand detail from one of our long conversations in his office. He had mentioned sending a specific variety of rare maple syrup to his sister in Vermont every Christmas. It was a tiny human detail in a sea of abstract theory. It was all I had. I spent the next day buried in online public records databases, a skill I'd honed tracking opposition research. I searched for women with the last name Finch living in Vermont. There were dozens. I started cross-referencing them with property records, looking for anyone who had lived at the same address for more than a decade. I remembered him saying she was a teacher. I narrowed the search to women whose listed occupations were in education. After 7 hours of painstaking work, I had a promising candidate, a retired high school English teacher named Carol Finch Dawson, living in a small rural town near the Green Mountains. I couldn't just call her. It would be too jarring, too invasive. This required a softer touch, a more human approach. I composed a letter. I wrote it by hand on simple, good-quality stationery. It took me 6 drafts to get the tone exactly right, respectful, sincere, and urgent, without being alarming. Dear Miss Finch Dawson, I wrote, my name is Sophie. I was a graduate student of your brother Dr. Alistair Finch at the university some years ago. He was a profound influence on my life and career, and I hold him in the highest esteem. I am writing to you because I have come into possession of something that I believe belongs to him, a piece of his academic work that I know was of immense personal importance. It is a matter of some delicacy and urgency. I have no wish to intrude, but I feel a deep moral obligation to see this returned to its rightful owner. If Alistair is able and willing to speak with me, he can reach me at this number. I included the number for a new, prepaid burner phone I had purchased that morning. I signed it, sealed it, and sent it via priority mail with tracking. And then, the hardest part of any plan began, the waiting. For 6 days, the burner phone sat silent on my coffee table, a small black brick of potential. Every time my personal phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. Doubt began to creep in. Had I overstepped? Was the letter in a trash can in Vermont? Had I misread everything? I forced myself to work, refining my strategy, mapping out potential scenarios, but my focus was always on that silent black phone. I started to think about what Grayson's theft had truly cost Alistair. It wasn't just a book, it was his confidence, his voice in the world. To have the one thing you've poured your soul into stolen and corrupted by a man like Grayson. It wasn't just theft, it was a kind of soul murder, and my mission to correct it became less about strategy and more about a deep, burning need to restore a brilliant man's legacy. It wasn't about revenge, it was about resurrection. On the evening of the 7th day, it rang. The generic, tinny ringtone sliced through the silence of my apartment, making me jump. My hands were trembling as I answered it. Hello, a long pause on the other end. Then a voice, hesitant and thin, like an old book page, rusty from disuse. Is this, Sophie, Dr. Finch? I breathed, a wave of profound relief washing over me. Yes, it's me. Thank you for calling. There was another long silence. I could hear his faint, shallow breathing. My sister, she said, you found something. I took a deep breath. Yes, sir. I have a copy of your manuscript, Symbiotic Localism, and I have the emails, the ones from Grayson Hemlock. The silence that followed this was different. It wasn't just hesitation. It was the sound of a 5-year-old wound being exposed to the air. It was heavy with pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I see. I laid out the situation as gently as I could. I told him about my 5 years working for Grayson, about the Senate campaign, about how Grayson had built his entire career on the foundation of that stolen work. I told him what they had done to me, not for pity, but to establish a common cause. We were 2 people erased by the same man. And then I told him my plan, not to leak it to the press and create a chaotic scene that would turn his work into a political football. No, my plan was more precise. It was a quiet, surgical strike aimed at the source of Grayson's power, his donors and the party establishment. I explained that I wanted to expose the fraud, not to destroy the man, but to reclaim the work, to get it published under his name, to give him back his voice. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, he broke me, Sophie, that man. I couldn't face the world after that. The humiliation, I just wanted to disappear. Why would you do this? What do you want? I want to see your name on the cover of your book, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That's all. It wasn't about revenge against Grayson. It was about justice for you. He was quiet again. I could hear him thinking, weighing the risk of trusting someone again against the pain of his stolen legacy. Finally he spoke, a little stronger this time. There's something else, a fail-safe I built into the document. I was always paranoid about digital theft. I embedded a digital watermark. In the document's raw code, on line 734, there's a hidden string of commented out text. It's the first line of a poem by Rilke. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, only I know it's there. A key, a hidden, undeniable signature. It was the final piece, the irrefutable proof. All right, Sophie, he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. I will trust you. I don't want to be in the spotlight. I can't, but I will authorize you to act as my proxy. Use the work, use the proof, just bring it home. I hung up the phone, a profound sense of purpose settling over me. I had the weapon, I had the intelligence network, and now I had the blessing of the man whose life I was trying to put back together. The foundation of my plan was complete. Now it was time to build the walls. The first move in a quiet war is never a cannon shot. It's a whisper in the right ear. While Grayson and Sterling were busy focus grouping empty slogans and designing new lawn signs, I was studying the architecture of Grayson's support. A political campaign isn't just a candidate, it's an ecosystem of power brokers, fundraisers, and influential donors. These were the load-bearing walls of his ambition. My goal was not to demolish the building with a wrecking ball, but to silently remove those walls, one by one, until the whole rotten structure collapsed under its own weight. From my 5 years of writing fundraising emails and strategy memos, I had an intimate understanding of Grayson's donor base. I knew who the true believers were, and who were the pragmatists simply backing a winner. My target was the keystone of that arch, Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a legend, a self-made tech billionaire in her late 60s. She was the single largest donor to the state party and a revered kingmaker. She was fiercely intelligent, notoriously private, and had a famous, almost pathological intolerance for fraud and intellectual dishonesty. She had built her empire on the integrity of her code. Her backing was the seal of approval that made Grayson's Senate run viable. Getting to her would be difficult. She was insulated by layers of assistants and gatekeepers. But I had an advantage. I knew the people who worked for her. 2 years prior, I had worked closely with a sharp young policy analyst from Eleanor's family office on a joint tech advisory committee. Her name was Anya. We had bonded over a shared frustration with bureaucratic nonsense. I had her personal cell number. I sent Anya a simple text. Anya, it's Sophie. I need to ask for a significant favor. I have some time-sensitive information regarding Congressman Hemlock that I believe Eleanor needs to see. It pertains directly to her standards of intellectual integrity. Can you get me 15 minutes? It was a risk. Anya could have ignored it, or worse, reported it back to Grayson's camp, but I was betting on my judgment of her character. The bet paid off. 2 hours later, she replied, Eleanor's schedule is a fortress, but the phrase intellectual integrity is a master key. She'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m., her private office. Don't be late. That night, I didn't sleep. I rehearsed my presentation, trimming it down to its most essential, powerful elements. I printed a physical copy of Dr. Finch's manuscript. I printed the email chain. I prepared a simple one-page document with clear step-by-step instructions on how to locate the digital watermark in the PDF source code. I would not be going in with a frantic accusation. I would be a presenter of facts, calm, professional, undeniable. The next morning, I walked into the gleaming, minimalist lobby of Vance Innovations. The air hummed with a quiet, efficient power that made Grayson's Capitol Hill office look like a chaotic student union. Anya met me and led me to a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. Eleanor Vance was sitting not behind a large desk, but in a simple armchair, a tablet in her lap. She was smaller than I expected, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything at once. She didn't stand, she just gestured to the chair opposite her. Anya gave me a small, encouraging nod and closed the door, leaving us alone. You have 15 minutes, Eleanor said, her voice calm and direct. Begin. I didn't start with the accusation. I started with the source. I placed the bound copy of the manuscript on the table between us. I said, Miss Vance, this is a manuscript titled Symbiotic Localism. It is the life's work of a brilliant but reclusive economist named Dr. Alistair Finch. It was completed in 2018. Then I placed the printed emails next to it. These are emails from that same year, showing your party's chosen Senate candidate, Grayson Hemlock, requesting and receiving a digital copy of this unpublished work from Dr. Finch under false pretenses, just before he was set to present it publicly. Finally, I placed the instruction sheet on top, and this document will show you how to find Dr. Finch's digital signature, a unique watermark hidden in the code of the PDF file I can send you, proving his authorship beyond any doubt. The platform that Congressman Hemlock has used as the foundation of his entire political identity, the Hemlock Economic Miracle, is a word-for-word plagiarism of this document. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't display any emotion. I simply presented the evidence, piece by piece, as if I were a lawyer presenting exhibits in a courtroom. I had built a logical cage, and there was no way out of it. Eleanor Vance listened without saying a word. Her eyes moved from my face to the documents on the table. She picked up the email chain and read it. Her expression did not change, but I saw her knuckles tighten almost imperceptibly on the paper. She then picked up the instruction sheet. She looked at it for a long moment, then looked back at me. Her blue eyes were like ice. Send the PDF to Anya, she said. I pulled out my phone, attached the file to a pre-written email, and sent it. A moment later, Eleanor's tablet chimed. She spent the next 5 minutes silently working on her device. I could see her following my instructions, her fingers swiping and tapping with practiced efficiency. I waited, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. Then she stopped. She looked up from the tablet, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It was a cold, controlled fury, the kind of fury a master builder might feel upon discovering a fatal crack in a foundation. She had been lied to, her intelligence had been insulted, her support had been obtained through fraud. She didn't speak to me. She simply picked up her phone and pressed a single button on her screen. A voice answered immediately. Mr. Chairman, it's Eleanor Vance. We have a problem. A significant problem with the Hemlock campaign. It appears its entire intellectual property foundation is fraudulent. My support is on hold. We need to meet today. She hung up. She looked at me, her expression once again unreadable. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sophie. Your discretion is appreciated. Anya will see you out. And that was it. The first wall had been removed. I walked out of that building and back into the sunlight, feeling a strange sense of lightness. The war wasn't over, but the decisive battle had been won, and the enemy didn't even know it had begun. The fallout was not a storm, but a sudden deathly quiet, a vacuum. I knew from my daily reports from Maya that the Hemlock campaign headquarters, which had been buzzing with the manic energy of a major launch, had fallen eerily silent. The first sign of trouble was the call from the party chairman's office, postponing a major fundraising dinner indefinitely due to a scheduling conflict. Sterling Vance, Maya reported, had been apoplectic, screaming about incompetence. Grayson had locked himself in his office. Then the phone calls started not being returned. A major PAC that had pledged 7 figures in television ad buys was suddenly re-evaluating its Q3 political spending. A group of powerful tech executives who were supposed to host a high-dollar event in Silicon Valley sent a terse email canceling it, citing unforeseen market volatility. It was a cascade of polite corporate excuses that all meant the same thing: the money was gone, the support had vanished. Maya's emails became a chronicle of a slow-motion collapse. Sterling was in a full-blown panic, alternately blaming the party, the economy, and in increasingly loud rants, me. He told Grayson I was a vindictive, disgruntled amateur who was poisoning the well. Grayson, according to Maya, was a ghost. He was pale, withdrawn, and spent hours on the phone, his voice a low, pleading murmur. The noise was all on their side, the frantic phone calls, the panicked meetings, the accusations. My side was pure silence. I didn't answer calls from reporters who were starting to sniff around the edges of the story. I didn't post a single word online. I simply ceased to exist, letting the vacuum I had created do the work for me. The campaign was starving of oxygen, and they didn't even know who had closed the vents. The power shift was not gradual, it was a tectonic event, a sudden and irreversible fracturing of the landscape. The quiet exodus of donors became a stampede. The news, when it finally broke, wasn't a front-page scandal. It was an inside baseball story in a niche political journal, a short, devastating article titled "Hemlock Senate Bid Falters as Key Backers Grow Cold." It didn't mention plagiarism or Dr. Finch. It didn't need to. It simply quoted anonymous sources close to the state party's biggest donors, all expressing a sudden and coordinated loss of confidence in the campaign's core message. It was a beautifully sterile assassination. Eleanor Vance's fingerprints were nowhere to be seen, but her work was unmistakable. The article sent the final shockwave through what was left of the campaign. The few remaining loyal staffers began circulating their resumes. The office, Maya told me, felt like a morgue. The grand announcement rally was quietly removed from the official schedule. The campaign was dead, and there would be no funeral. And then my phone rang. The number was Grayson's personal cell. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. I said nothing. "Sophie?" His voice was a wreck. A frantic, desperate attempt at the old charming tone, but it was frayed at the edges with pure raw panic. "Sophie, thank God. I've been calling." I waited. "Listen, kid." "Sophie, I know things ended badly. I made a mistake. Sterling was a mistake. He's gone. I fired him this morning. He didn't get it. He didn't get me. You do. You always did." The desperation was nauseating. He was trying to rewind the clock, to pretend the last few weeks hadn't happened. "I'm offering you the job," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "Campaign director, chief strategist, whatever title you want, double the salary. We can fix this. We can get it back on track. We just need to get in a room and craft a new message. We can do this, Sophie, together." The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it was breathtaking. Even now, with his world collapsing around him, he still thought the problem was the message. He still thought all he needed was me, his ghost, to write him a new reality. He still didn't understand that the problem wasn't the message, it was the man. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then I spoke, my voice low and calm. "No, Grayson, we can't." "Why not?" he pleaded. "I'll give you anything you want." "It was never about what I wanted," I said, the words falling like chips of ice. "It's about the work, the foundation, the economic platform you built your entire career on. It was never yours to begin with." The silence on his end was absolute. I had finally said the quiet part out loud, the unmentionable truth. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the frantic calculation as he realized this wasn't about a job title. "What are you talking about?" he finally stammered, his voice weak. "I'm talking about Dr. Alistair Finch," I said, letting the name land with its full weight. "I'm talking about his manuscript. I'm talking about a life's work that you stole." He started to bluster, a cornered animal making a final pathetic show of aggression. "You can't prove that. That's slander. It's defamation. I'll sue you into the ground, you ungrateful." I cut him off, my voice still perfectly level. "Go ahead, Grayson. Please file the lawsuit. The discovery process will be fascinating. Dr. Finch has already given me his full legal authorization to act as his representative in all matters concerning his intellectual property. I'm sure the New York Times would be very interested in covering a trial that features the sworn testimony of a brilliant academic whose career you destroyed. Your call." Checkmate. The line went dead. He hadn't hung up on me. It was the sound of a king toppling over on the board. The game was over. I had not only taken his pieces, I had flipped the entire table. The power had not just shifted, it had been utterly and completely transferred. His fate was no longer in his hands, it was in mine, and I was done playing. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic showdown in a corporate boardroom, it was pathetic. He showed up at my apartment building 2 days later, unannounced. He must have waited for me to get home. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his perfect hair was a mess, and his eyes were bloodshot and desperate. He tried to stop me in the lobby. "Sophie, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Just 5 minutes. We can't end it like this." I didn't want to make a scene. I let him follow me up to my apartment. I didn't invite him in. I just turned in the doorway and faced him. He started to talk, a rambling, incoherent monologue about his career, his dreams, the good he wanted to do. He tried to appeal to our shared history, to the 5 years we had worked together. He talked about loyalty, about second chances. He said his life was over, that everything he had worked for was turning to dust. He was trying to make me feel sorry for him. He was trying to find the old Sophie, the one who would clean up his messes and protect him from the consequences of his own actions. But that Sophie was gone. She had been executed in his office 2 weeks ago. I listened patiently until he ran out of words. The hallway was silent except for the hum of the building's ventilation. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of detached pity. For 5 years, Grayson, you called me kid, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of every slight, every condescending pat on the head. You saw me as an instrument, a tool to make you sound like the man you wished you were. You thought that, because I was quiet, I was simple. You thought that, because I did the work, I didn't understand the power. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The funny thing is, a kid would have thrown a tantrum, I continued. A kid would have screamed and leaked the story to the first reporter who would listen. A kid would have made it all about her wounded feelings. I didn't do any of that. I just took the bricks you discarded, and I built a better house. A house with a foundation you can't touch, on land you don't own. You aren't being destroyed by my anger, Grayson. You're being destroyed by my competence. The same competence you took for granted for 5 years. Now please leave. He deflated. The last bit of fight went out of him. He looked old and small. He turned without another word and walked toward the elevator, a ghost haunting the hallway of his own ruin. A week later, a small article appeared on the national newswires, citing personal health reasons and a desire to spend more time with his family. Congressman Grayson Hemlock announced today that he will not be seeking re-election, nor will he continue with his exploratory bid for the United States Senate. It was the classic, ignominious exit for a failed politician, a quiet, face-saving lie to cover an epic, career-ending failure. Sterling Vance had vanished back into the swampy world of high-priced consultants from which he came. The entire edifice of Grayson Hemlock had simply ceased to exist. My new reality didn't involve a corner office on Capitol Hill. It was better. It was real. 6 months later, I found myself in the hushed, sunlit reading room of a university library. The air smelled of old paper and new beginnings. Sitting across from me was Dr. Alistair Finch. He looked like a different man. The haunted, fearful look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. The tweed jacket was still rumpled, but he stood taller. We were going over the final proofs of his book. Its title, in crisp, elegant font on the cover page, was Symbiotic Localism, and underneath it, the author's name, Dr. Alistair Finch. I had used my connections, the ones I had made despite Grayson's efforts to keep me in the shadows, to get the manuscript in front of a senior editor at a prestigious university press. When they read it, they didn't see a political football. They saw the groundbreaking work it was. They fast-tracked its publication. I had written a new foreword for the book, explaining the theoretical framework for a lay audience. My name was on that page, foreword by Sophie Rivas. It was the first time my name had been attached to my own words in a public forum in 5 years. But my true vindication was in the acknowledgments. I saw it for the first time that day, as I flipped to the back of the proofs. Alistair hadn't told me what he was going to write. His words hit me with a quiet, profound force. And finally, to Sophie Rivas, the architect of this book's second chance. She saw the value in the work when its own author had abandoned it. Her integrity gave it a voice, her strategy gave it a future, and her friendship gave me a reason to believe in it again. She is living proof that the most powerful force in the universe is not ambition, but quiet, unwavering competence. That was my victory. Not the fall of Grayson Hemlock, but the rise of Dr. Alistair Finch. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. We had already started a small specialized consulting firm, the Institute for Symbiotic Economics. I was the managing director. He was the senior fellow. We weren't chasing power or fame. We were helping small towns and struggling cities implement his models. We were doing the work, the real work, and the credit went where it was earned. The world doesn't always divide neatly into heroes and villains, but sometimes it gives you a moment of pure, undeniable clarity. For me, that moment came a year after Grayson Hemlock disappeared from public life. I was standing at a podium, not in the shadows to the side, but right in the center of the stage. The banner behind me didn't have a politician's name on it. It had the name of our institute. I was presenting our first major case study, the successful revitalization of a small former factory town in Pennsylvania, to a national conference of urban planners. I wasn't the ghostwriter, I was the keynote speaker. My name, on my own terms. And as I look back on it all now, I want to talk to you directly. To anyone out there who feels invisible. To anyone who pours their heart and soul into their work, only to watch someone else sign their name to it. To anyone who has ever been called kid when you were the most mature person in the room. That feeling of being erased, of being underestimated, it's not a weakness. It's a superpower in disguise. It's a cloak of invisibility. When they don't see you as a threat, they don't watch you. They don't see you learning the systems, building the relationships, and quietly gathering the keys to the kingdom. They don't realize you're the one who knows where all the bodies are buried, because you're the one they made dig the graves. My story wasn't truly about revenge. If it were, I would have released the emails and watched the world burn. That would have been noisy, chaotic, and ultimately it would have centered him. Instead, I chose a different path. It was about value, the intrinsic value of good work, and the moral imperative to protect it. It was about proving that true power isn't the ability to give a great speech, it's the ability to write it. It's the competence, the strategy, the quiet, relentless focus that the loud, arrogant people in charge so often mistake for meekness. They thought they were burying me, but they misjudged the soil. They didn't know they were planting a seed in the most fertile ground possible. Righteous anger, backed by undeniable competence. The world is full of Grayson Hemlocks. They are loud, they are confident, and they are almost always standing on a foundation built by someone else. But the world is also full of Sophies. The quiet architects, the silent strategists, the invisible builders. So if you are one of them, know this, your work has value even if they don't acknowledge it. Your voice has power, even if they don't let you speak, and your time will come. Don't wait for them to give you credit. Build your own platform. Be so good they can't ignore you, but be so smart they never see you coming. Your vindication will not be in their downfall, but in your own quiet, undeniable rise. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the ghost in your own machine, let me know in the comments below. It helps to know we're not alone. And if you believe that competence is the ultimate currency, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And of course, for more stories about turning the tables, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thank you for listening.